Minister, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you. Good to be with you, David.
I want to talk specifically, before we get to the questions of what's happening more broadly in the Middle East and the turmoil there this week, about the threat from Iran. You spoke about that this week and this question of whether Israel has to take matters into its own hands, and you launched pretty pointed criticism at the United States. I want to play a portion of what you said.
The world tells Israel, wait, there's still time. And I say, wait for what? Wait until when? Those in the international community who refuse to put red lines before Iran don't have a moral right to place a red light before Israel.
And we want to send a message all around the world. Anybody who would do us harm, no act of terror will dim the light of the values that we proudly shine on the rest of the world, and no act of violence will shake the resolve of the United States of America.
How the White House should be handling the situation this morning in Yemen, in Cairo, and of course across the Middle East. What about Israel? Is the president handling the situation with Bibi Netanyahu correctly?
Well, I'm not quite sure how he's handling it, because I don't know what transpired in the course of that telephone call. But I think the president has to act presidential. Last time he was intimidated. I think this time he has been provoked. I think he ought to make it very clear what the American national interest is in dealing with Iran, and in dealing with Syria, and in dealing with the region. The fact of the matter is that only a healthy United States can assure in the long run the well-being of Israel. If we get dragged into two wars now, not just one but two, we'll be paralyzed internationally for years, and the region will be in a mess. And I think the president has to be absolutely explicit on this. There's also another aspect to it. We have to be clear as to what is tolerable in the United States insofar as these crises are concerned. We have freedom of speech here, we have to protect it. But we have to draw a line between absolutely irresponsible and deliberate provocation. This movie has been shown on the public television by a fundamentalist Christian pastor who has an obsession about Iran and has been trying to about the Muslims, and he's been trying to provoke them now for a couple of years. And there is an Israeli movie maker who makes a movie clearly designed to touch the most sensitive, almost irrational feelings of the Muslims regarding their prophet. It was designed to make him look like a pervert, like an irrational individual. It was clearly designed to provoke. This man raised $5 million to have that movie made. I mean, we are dealing here with incitement to violence at a time which is very perilous. Other domestic dimension, let me just add one more point, is of course the Romney aspect. And here I have one simple suggestion, because I want the Republicans to have a serious candidate, because he could be the president. He ought to have someone like Steve Hadley, a former national security advisor to President Bush, or Bob Zoellick, the former head of the World Bank, give him strategic advice, and not listen to the people whose names have appeared so often in the press, and whose names were very prominent back in 2003 when the United States started its unfortunate adventures in the Middle East by attacking Iraq.
David Ignatius, Dr. Brzezinski talked about how the president was intimidated by Israel before. Now he's being provoked. Tell me strategically, do you believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu may be provoking or trying to back the president to a corner because he believes a military strike against Iran may be imminent?
I think the Prime Minister is pushing President Obama to set an ultimatum. The phrase red lines is used, but it's really an ultimatum that he wants. And I think the point that the Obama administration needs to make is the president has already set a red line. He has said the United States will prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, not simply because it's a threat to Israel, but because it's a threat to U.S. national security interests. In other words, this is our problem, our issue, our set of red lines. I think he's going to need to say that.
Well, but it may not be a partisan issue. You've known Mitt Romney a long time. The reality is, tell me if you disagree, that Governor Romney, just an interview this week, said that his position is very much the same as President Obama. They are both committed to preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Not just as an impartial observer, as the Prime Minister of Israel. Do you agree with that, that both the president and his challenger have the same view with regard to preventing Iran from going nuclear?
I have no doubt that they're equally committed to preventing that. It's a vital American interest. It's an existential interest on my case. So this isn't the issue. We're united on this across the board.
Why can't Iran be contained just as the Soviet Union was? There are those in your country and in the United States who believe that a containment strategy would actually work.
I think Iran is very different. They put their zealotry above their survival. They have suicide bombers all over the place. I wouldn't rely on their rationality. You know, since the advent of nuclear weapons, you've had countries that had access to nuclear weapons who always made a careful calculation of cost and benefit. But Iran is guided by a leadership with an unbelievable fanaticism. It's the same fanaticism that you see storming your embassies today.
Where do we stand? What do we do next?
Well, what we do is we change our policies toward Israel and make it very clear that we will work with Israel to develop red lines. Quite frankly, I share the Prime Minister's frustration. Sanctions are not working. They're hurting the Iranian economy, but they're not stopping the Iranian behavior of acquiring a nuclear weapon. They have two goals in Iran, the Ayatollahs. Number one, to get nuclear capability that will protect the regime, because they believe if they get a nuclear weapon, the West will leave them alone. And the second goal is to use that nuclear power to intimidate their neighbors and spread Persian Shia influence. It's clear to me they're never going to change their nuclear desires until they believe the survival of the regime's at stake. And sanctions and diplomacy is not working. We should have red lines communicated to Iran quickly, coordinated with Israel, and they must believe, the Iranians, that a massive U.S. military strike will come their way if they continue to acquire a nuclear weapon. The region is about to blow up. I was in Iraq. It breaks my heart to see Iraq fall apart. Syria is a contagion affecting the entire Mideast. This administration has no concept of the Arab Spring. They're disengaging on all fronts. The lack of leadership is about to lead to an explosion in the Mideast. And I hope people will start focusing on foreign policy.
Well, of course, September 11th was and what happened was, of course, a very, very serious thing. I believe that it reveals the true colors of Islam. And we thought about what can we do to really show the dangers of what happened that day. And it's not only what happened that day, but actually what Islam does around the world. And we felt burning the Quran would be something of that magnitude.
You said the region is about to blow up. What do you mean by that specifically?
The American disengagement, lack of leadership, leading from behind, is leading to uncertainty and doubt on all fronts. The Sunnis, the Shias, and the Kurds that were working together well after the surge success have now gone back into their corners. We've got a sort of a hands-off policy toward Iraq. There have been no progress in filling the ministries and having a hydrocarbon law. Every group, the Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, are just very disappointed with Americans' disengagement, are allowing Assad to murder his own people and have a detached view about how Syria is affecting the entire region, is emboldening Iran. How are the Iranians going to be ever convinced we're serious about their nuclear program when we sit on the sidelines in Syria? The French are calling for a no-fly zone. The Turks are calling for a no-fly zone. And again, Libya is an example of where leading from behind was not the right strategy. The small group who did this doesn't represent the Libyan people, but America has to lead. There is no substitute for leadership by the United States, and every group within the region is uncertain about who we are and what we believe, and Israel is paying the biggest price of all because our policies toward Iran are confusing, and you cannot allow Russia and China to be able to veto the effort by people in the region to be free. They're dictatorships themselves.
It is a big question for us today. What is American leadership, not only today, but what is it in general for this next generation as we continue to watch these events unfold? Senator Graham, nice to have you today as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now do you see him? He's gone. Khadija, he's gone. How have you done this? And this shall be the first Muslim animal.
What is your name? Yafor. His name is Yafor. Yafor, do you like the women? No. Yafor does not like the women. Yafor!
Please, my cousin, you must help us.
I will help you, Khadija. I will make a book for him. It will be a mix between some versions from the Torah and some versions from the New Testament, and mix them into false verses.
And the inspiration has disappeared.
Waraka is dead, and the inspiration has disappeared.
Don't understand. What is the relationship between Waraka's death and the inspiration?
No, I must return to the mountain. Find a solution or kill myself. I've been to the top of the mountain to jump.
It's going to put the troops at risk, not only American, but all ISAF troops. It also puts just Westerners in general at risk, NGOs, aid workers, whoever happens to be in Afghanistan. First of all, in the short term, it causes the possibility of riots and that sort of thing. But also it serves as a recruiting tool for the Taliban, which doesn't help in the long term.
Well, I believe it's Islam's mission to dominate the world, to replace local governments, to replace the Constitution of the United States with Sharia law. I believe that's very obvious that as you look around the world, you see the fruits of Islam. You look at the trouble that England's having, the trouble that Germany's having, Holland. You see dominated countries who are dominated by Islam, even countries like Saudi Arabia. You see there are no individual freedoms and rights.
The desire of the people, this is their chosen form of punishment, and the Quran was found guilty. Thus we are obligated to fulfill this punishment. If we are ready, then go ahead. Please close the doors.